Wonderful. I notice we still have a few people that are coming in, but I think we can kick things off. So welcome everyone, I'm Aaron Upright, one of the founders of Zenhub, and today we're here to talk about software estimation. And specifically, what we're going to be talking about is a lot of the common estimation myths that we hear from a lot of teams who are thinking of adopting estimation or who are maybe trying to start adopting estimation, but have some reservations about it. And our goal here today is to debunk or dispel a lot of these myths and share some really practical advice on how you and your team can get started with estimation so that ultimately you can get more clarity on your capacity, start to understand your velocity, and have a better understanding going forward of how much work you can take on. And so to do that, I'm joined by two experts today. And we're lucky enough to have JJ Sutherland, who's the CEO of Scrum Inc. and co-author of the best-selling book Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, along with George Champlin-Scharf, who is Zenhub's own VP of Customer Success and resident Agile effort. Gentlemen, I don't want to steal the thunder from you. JJ, why don't you give just a quick 30-second intro and bit of background?
Sure. My name is JJ Sutherland. I'm the CEO of Scrum Inc. We are a consulting and training company that was based in Boston. Now we're all remote. And we work with companies all over the world, everything from startups to Fortune 100s to governments to militaries to whatever. And before that, I was a journalist for a long time. I was a Baghdad bureau chief for NPR for about 7 years. So I sort of come to this not as a software engineer, but as a journalist.
Oh, sorry about that. And George, why don't you give the audience just a brief background on yourself as well?
Sure. So as Aaron mentioned, I am part of the team here at Zenhub. I work with our customer base to help them be successful. And prior to Zenhub, I spent a fair few years in the IBM Watson organization where I got to play a role in modernizing how we worked, which is a big challenge. I got to work with a lot of teams there and just a lot over the years. I was a developer at one point in my career, but those days are long gone. But I learned a lot and hopefully can contribute to today's conversation.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you.
I'm also an angel investor in Zenhub. So Tyler convinced me to put some money in. So I care deeply about your success.
Awesome. Well, like I said, it's great to have you both here today. We're super excited to have you both as panelists for the webinar today. So how this is going to work roughly is I'm going to introduce a real myth that we've heard from a lot of our customers, whether that's in support conversations or through some of the coaching calls and interactions that we've had with different teams. And then what I'm going to do is turn things over to JJ and to George so that they can provide some feedback and their perspective on those different myths and hopefully debunk them and give all of you listening here some really good tips on how you can start working estimation into your process. So without further ado, let's start with myth number one here. I'm just going to minimize my chat window here. So myth number one, all estimates are wrong, so there's no point in actually estimating work. At Zenhub, we actually have a webinar that we run called All Estimates Are Wrong. So perhaps we're partly behind this myth or perpetrating this myth. But JJ, let's start with you. We know that no estimate is ever perfect, but should that prevent us from actually estimating work?
Well, all estimates are wrong, but you got to guess, and you, as you continue to estimate as a team, your guesses get better and better and better. Because you really want some sort of sense, because listen, this is what leadership wants. When is it going to be done? Right? And you have to have some sort of, or your customers, when is it going to be done? You have to have some sort of answer to that question. And as you estimate, you're going to get what we call reference stories. So like at Scrum Inc., when I write a blog, it's 5 points. It's always 5 points. And no matter what, some blogs take me a lot longer than other blogs. Some blogs don't take me that long, but it's going to be, so I know that it's going to be about 5 points of effort. And so I just know that. So it's really easy for me to just slide it in. Or, this webinar is 3 points in my backlog. So that's the kind of thing we do. So it's really a sense of capacity and how you spend your capacity. And if you don't estimate, how are you going to answer the question, When is it going to be done? And as you do more and more, you get better and better at it and more accurate. Oh, one other thing is, let's say you estimate a bunch of things in your backlog. Some of them are going to be too big and some of them are going to be too small. And so hopefully that averages out and you get a fairly decent idea.
George, anything that you'd add on that too? I'm curious to get your perspective on that.
So
yeah,
absolutely. So I think one of the things that JJ touched on is that this is a communication tool, and without estimates, especially if you're working in a tool like GitHub, everything looks the same. And so without estimates, there's no way for you to show your team or your team of teams, your stakeholders, that one thing is harder than another thing. And so it's a great way to help, kind of gauge expectation as you start to plan, as you look forward, as you try and answer that question that, JJ nailed it right out of the gate. When are you going to be done? That's what everybody wants to know. So,
and from the team's point of view, the other thing it allows you to do is to manage expectations of customers and stakeholders. Because I was at this one bank, God, I will not name this bank, but this is a few years ago, they were doing a merger. So they had to be done. They just bought another part of another bank. And so they had to be done legally by, I think it was like January 1st. And I went over there in, I don't know, April or May. And so I went to one of the Scrum Masters and I said, okay, how many points of stuff did you get done last week? He's like, 22. I was like, well, how many bring you into the sprint next week? 175. And I was like, why? It's like, well, management says we have to, because we got to get all this stuff done. And then I was like, let me call you in 2 weeks to see how it went. I called him, how much stuff do you get done? He goes, 19 points of stuff. I was like, how much you bring into the next sprint? 188. And so then I went to management and I said, listen, today you get to pick which customers you're going to lose, because not all of it is going to get done. And it really forces prioritization, because there is a capacity limits team. There is a limit to what teams can produce. And you really want to be able to go to stakeholders and say, listen, this is our velocity, this is our capacity, this is the amount of stuff we can produce in a sprint. Which one do you want? We'll do whatever you want. You're the stakeholder if you want this feature or that feature, but you can't have both.
Mm-hmm. Got it. That is a probably really good segue into, I think, our second myth, which kind of touches on this idea of actual time versus, estimated time. And this is this concept we hear from a lot of teams, because I think, as you guys mentioned, a lot of teams really want to understand at the end of the day, or organizations want to understand where time is being spent. So myth number 2 is that story points should always translate or always equate back to hours spent on a task. And George, we'll start with you on this one this time. What do you think about this myth? And as teams who are adopting estimates or story point estimates, should we be translating those back to time?
Yeah. So a couple of things. First, there's been a lot of research about estimation techniques and how wrong they can be. And there was a research paper done by a team at Microsoft. It was a IEEE paper of the year. This is going back a few years, but the research is solid. And they found that time-based estimates tend to be more wrong than what they called group-based relative sizing. So you take a body of work, you compare new work to that body of work, and you assign a value being a point. Now, I recognize in the real world, a lot of people work and have billable hours, and they need to be able to make some mapping of time. What I'd say is that you can take your estimates and then look back over time. And if you need to do the billable hours thing, figure it out from your velocity, from what you've actually accomplished, and make the mapping there. If I know when I was a developer and somebody asked me how long it was going to take me, I would always think it was going to be a breeze and I'd get it done in no time at all. And I was always horribly wrong. So the success that we've seen, the highest levels of success has been when you take time out of the equation. you look at capacity, you compare new work against old work, and you're going to have estimates that are way less wrong than anything in hours, because we just stink at it. Humans are bad at estimating time, except for my wife. She's actually freakishly good at it. But everybody else, not so much.
Yeah, I would say that there has been a ton of research, because humans are horrible at estimating things in hours. Like, is this, and then you get into these debates during, sprint planning, is this going to be 7 hours or 8 hours? And that could be, because humans are just really bad at it. It's like, what we're really good at though is that pile of rocks bigger than that pile of rocks? To compare it, doing this, reference, and you can do it, there's different ways of doing estimation, which I won't get into, to get these story points. You just do t-shirt sizes. And it's so much more accurate. As George said, I won't bore you with all the research. There's like a really great one from Rally Software a few years ago. They do an online, similar sort of backlog management tool. They had data from like 70,000 teams, which I figure that's a pretty good data set. And it was just, showed that it was really far more accurate not to do time. The other reason you don't want to do time is because part of the idea in Scrum is that you get faster. And so you want to be able to do, let's say your team could do 20 points this sprint. As a Scrum Master, you want to think, okay, what's slowing the team down? Why could they only get 20? Could we do 22 next sprint or 30 eventually? And so you want to get an increase in velocity, because Scrum teams, you work together better, you learn the work better, you remove the things that are slowing you down. And what the velocity is a metric that shows you that the team is improving. Because when, the title of the last book, twice the work in half the time, well, you got to measure how you're going to get there, right? So you have some sort of baseline velocity, and then, usually over the average of 3 sprints or so. And then you say, okay, now we're here. How are we going to get better? And how do we measure if we get better? Because if you don't measure it, you don't know. But if it's always 40 hours a week, and if you do have to do billable, so it's Scrumming, I'm a consultant, right? So I get paid, I sell time. I sell people's time. So what I try to do is I sell sprints. So you're going to have this team for one sprint, it's going to cost you this much. And that's, obviously not every client will go for that, but that's really the way we try to do it. And most of our clients are doing that now. And what it gives us the flexibility to do is we're just selling a team for a sprint. Are they going to do training? Are they going to do coaching? Are they going to, teach, coach coaches? Are they going to do a Scrum Master course? It doesn't matter. You're just buying a sprint of a team. So that's really how we do it. And translating back to time is always. The other thing that I saw that one of our clients is they found that doing it in time actually demotivated people, because some engineer would say, oh, I'm going to estimate this at 8 hours. And as George said, you're always going to take longer. And then you take 16 hours. And the people are like, oh, I'm a bad developer. I should have been able to do it in 8 hours.
Yeah.
It's always really hard, I think. And I've heard from a lot of customers personally too, that feel like it's always a bit of a, finger to the wind in terms of putting a time estimate on it too. So but I think that's some great tips, I think, around not necessarily focusing on the hours, focusing on progress and focusing on the estimates. So I want to jump into to our third myth here, which is that you have to have a dedicated Scrum Master on the team to estimate work. JJ, you talked a little bit about, that Scrum Master and the concept of a Scrum Master in your last answer. We hear this one from a lot of customers, I think, especially on smaller teams where people are wearing multiple hats. They're playing multiple roles. Maybe it's an engineering manager that's also facilitating some of these Agile events, or a developer that's responsible for running one of these events. Do you have to have a dedicated Scrum Master on your team to take advantage of estimation?
So in the Scrum Guide, the Scrum Master is an accountability. It's not a job title. It means that someone needs to be accountable for doing the Scrum Master stuff. Now, would I say having a dedicated Scrum Master is better? Absolutely. However, I'm a radical pragmatist. So whatever works, you might not have the budget to have dedicated Scrum Masters. And so someone's going to, or they might rotate the role. And sort of in the sort of platonic ideal of Scrum, you don't even need a Scrum Master because the team can do it itself. That takes a very mature team. I certainly wouldn't recommend starting off that way. But if you need to get together, even if you don't have a Scrum Master role, someone needs to be paying attention. Maybe it's the whole team, but somebody needs to be accountable for, okay, who's going to facilitate the events? Who's going to remove impediments? Who's going to make those impediments visible to whatever layer of the company that can get rid of them? Someone needs to do that. That's part, and who's going to hold the team accountable for continuous improvement? Somebody needs to do it. But, in terms of estimation, if you had a dedicated Scrum Master, they wouldn't estimate at all, because the only people who estimate are people who are actually doing the work. And so it's really only the team members who estimate. The Scrum Master is that's there to facilitate the process. You don't really need the Scrum Master to do that. Just in backlog refinement, just sit down and estimate together as a team.
So, George, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, so I know we work with a lot of people who work in a lot of different ways. And as long as somebody's in the driver's seat, whether they be called a team leader, a pod leader, a squad lead, a development manager, a Scrum Master, an iteration manager, which we've heard from some, it doesn't matter. As long as somebody's there to initiate the practice, to hold the team accountable for doing it, and for kicking it off and making sure that it happens. It like JJ said, ideally, there's somebody in that role, in the driver's seat, like making sure that all of these super important things happen. Do they have to have Scrum Master listed after their name on the thing? They don't, but I can tell you the teams that do have somebody in that driver's seat, the teams that do have somebody acting as a Scrum Master and doing the things on a regular basis, they are far more successful than those that don't have somebody in the driver's seat. So, yeah. Again, somebody in the role, that's the important thing.
I'll go a little bit off script here too, but I'm curious as we talk about that person in the driver's seat for teams that are just starting out with, with Agile and with Scrum. How would you recommend appointing that person if there is no one that has that dedicated role or title on the team?
Oh, I think it's a question for the team. The team needs to figure out who can step up and give it a try. I mean, one of my favorite things to do when I work with a new team is to start with a retrospective, right? Figure out what's been going well, what hasn't been going well, and come up with an experiment to try for their next sprint. And if I start working with a team and it's clear that nobody's driving, that's one of the very first experiments that I would try with that team, is to say, all right, I noticed that, is there somebody on the team that could pick that up for the next sprint? Give it a try. And ideally, you want to find somebody who's well organized, who will show up on time, who will kick things off, make sure things happen. But it may take a sprint or two to figure out who that person is on the team. But in my eyes, leave it up to the team and try it out as an experiment to kick it off.
Yeah, I would just add, have someone who wants to do it. Because it's this role, and I don't care what you call it. You call them donkeys or mules. I don't care, whatever. I don't know why I'm stuck in equine metaphors, but the key is that someone needs to do it. Someone needs to take that accountability on. Otherwise, it just won't happen, right?
Right.
But also, you want someone who takes joy in team success rather than individual success, who really enjoys, getting things out of people's way, is not necessarily really hung up on being an individual contributor, all those things. And that's not everybody. And that's okay. For example, I am a horrible Scrum Master. I've had teams kick me off as I'm a really good product owner. But those are really two different, which is, prioritization, fast decision-making, comfort with ambiguity, all that kind of stuff. But those are two very different skill sets. Mm-hmm. And when my father first invented Scrum, the idea for the product owner Scrum Master, he was looking at the chief engineer role at Toyota. And the chief engineer role sort of did both of those. But to become a chief engineer at Toyota takes like 30 years. And you have to be really, really good. And he said, well, that's not going to happen. So he intentionally split in from the, process improvement piece from the what, from the product piece. And because having both of those in your head at the same time is really hard. And never do that, by the way. Don't have the same person be the product owner and the scrum master.
Yeah,
because
probably not a good
if
idea.
they are, the product owner part always wins.
Yeah.
Because product owners want more stuff, right? But you have to have some sort of person that can push against that demand to say, this is the capacity of the team, you're burning the team out, you know, this is, you're getting in the way of the team. So there needs to be, there's a natural tension there.
Yeah.
And that's designed in, there should be tension.
Got it. Awesome. Well, moving on to the next myth here. This kind of builds on a lot of the topics that we've been talking about. This one is a contentious one, and I think we might have lifted this almost verbatim from a support email at one point in time, which is new team members shouldn't be involved in estimating work. This is one in particular, or at least the sentiment behind it, that we hear from a lot of growing teams, maybe, you know, teams that have added a lot of developers recently or have been recently reorged. And so the team is coming together with half of one team and half of another team. The idea here being that only those team members that have worked on a particular part of the code base or a particular project should be involved in estimating that future work. So George, we'll start with you this time. What do you think of this one?
So this is tricky. I'll give a nuanced answer, right? Because I understand the intention here because velocity is tied to the team, and velocity can be, if the team changes, then that changes the definition of what their velocity is and what they're trying to improve on. Now, on the other side, what if that new team member is the one that's going to pick up the work and they don't have a say in it? And you know, the 5 other people on the team have done it a million times. And so they say, oh, that's an extra small story. And for the new team member, this is an extra large because of the cognitive lift in learning, you know, the 19 JavaScript frameworks that are in play and like everything else. It's a tricky thing. I would balance on the new team member kind of side of that argument and say, you know, it will disrupt your velocity, it will change what your capacity is. But I would include the new team member because they're going to be contributing to the work.
But my answer is, this is the flip answer, but what if the experienced team member gets hit by a bus? What happens to the work, right? The work has to be done. And it's really having a collective wisdom. So Agile estimation comes from, it's called the Delphi estimation technique, which comes from this Rand Corporation study that was classified for like 20 years. It was done in the early 1950s. And they were asked this question: how many nuclear weapons does the Soviet Union need to detonate on American soil to make it impossible for us to throw some back? Now, this is a really important question. The answer to this question is why we have an interstate highway system in the States, because that is exactly it. But so what they did is they said, okay, well, let's go to the experts in the room. So, you know, think about all the expertise you need for that. You need like engineering, you need physicists, you need military people, you need manufacturing, you need a whole bunch of different expertise. And of course, they gather them all in the room. The 4-star general goes, 300 weapons. Everyone goes, yes, sir, that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And so that's anchoring. So the loudest personality in the room will anchor and it'll be wrong. And so what they did was they said, okay, we're actually going to pick the different experts and we're going to send out, you know, a questionnaire. They did this by mail. They still use this in the military. They send it out by mail. Okay, tell us how many weapons, but tell us why. And then they sent it back. And then they scrubbed all the identifying information and sent the whys back to everyone again. And they said, okay, does this change your estimate knowing this? And they did it. I'm trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it was anywhere for the beginning, it was like between 200 and 7,000 was the estimates. And then it over 3 times, it went down to about 600-700. It's like, because you had so many different ideas, so many different lessons, so many different skill sets that you really want the input from everybody to come to the right answer.
Makes a lot of sense. One of the things we talked about though is velocity is terrifying a little bit too. But you know, as teams are growing, velocity is obviously going to change. And I think a lot of organizations find themselves in situations where they've, raised a venture round or where things are going really well. They're adding team members really, really quickly. How do you kind of navigate velocity in that sense when, you're hiring, dozens of engineers every month, for example, and the teams are constantly kind of changing around and not static. They're growing and kind of forming.
Well, George, you proved Brooks' Law at IBM.
That's right. We worked with a team. All right, I'll try and obfuscate this a little bit. A couple of things. If you're growing the team, hopefully you're not putting all brand new teams together and sending them off in the world without any guidance, support, or prior help. Hopefully you're growing, you're adding a person on this team, you're adding a person on this team. Once this team gets too big, you're splitting that up and creating some new teams with a mix of experienced and new hires. Now, JJ alluded to the fact that I worked with a team that once proved Brooks's Law, which is adding people to a late project only makes it later. We had a mandate. This is a prior role. This is not here at Zenhub. Prior role, we had a mandate that thou shalt move your project to Kubernetes by June 30th. Nobody, this is a number of years ago, nobody on the team had any experience with Kubernetes. Some on the team had never heard of Kubernetes. It was a brand new technology. The company, being forward thinking, saw it as like, this is the path to the future. We're containerizing everything. But the team had severe lack of knowledge and understanding. They came back, they did a spike. They came back and said, all right, based on other projects we have done, we believe this to be this big. And given our capacity over time, we're not going to make that June 30th deadline. We believe we can get this, and that done by the June 30th, again, based on our capacity. And the leadership team said, what if we get you some more people? And I begged the engineering manager not to take the new people. Don't take the new people. And they said, but if I don't take them now, we may never get more people for this project. And they took the people, and what we saw, and this was amazing, as the new team came on, we saw the number of messages in the Slack team channel go up, and sprint over sprint, we started seeing the velocity go down because the old team members were now spending most of their time trying to boot up the new team members who knew about Kubernetes, but nothing else about the product. And it was almost like a traffic accident where as the new team got up and going, the Slack messages tailed off, but the velocity didn't just bounce back. It took a long time to recover. And at the end of it, June 30th came and went, and the team was even further behind than they would have been had they not taken the new team members on. Adding team members is so tricky on when to do it, how to do it. The least disruptive method I've ever seen is when you add a new person to a team that's been around, and when a team gets too big, split them into again, balance between experienced and new hires. It's hard, and you got to pick the right point too, because if you pick it at the wrong point in your cycle, oh boy, you can really mess things up.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the story.
And I mean, if that happens, like sometimes you got it, you're doing rapid scaling and that just happens, know the costs of the decisions you're making. And so, hey, if I have this, a majority of new people on a team or a brand new team with all new people, it's going to slow everything down, which is fine as long as you know that and can plan for it. It's like, okay, if we do this, things will temporarily slow down, and that's okay. But because as a product owner, what you're thinking is, okay, if I invest this amount of capacity into this, when am I going to get it back? When is this investment going to pay off? And that way a product owner or a leader can say, okay, I know that this is going to slow down development for 2 months, but that's okay because I need the skill set. I need more teams because we're getting bigger. So, but that's going to pay off in 3 months. Okay, I'm willing to invest that, but you can't expect the same amount of production as you introduce newer people, because everything's just going to slow down.
Those are some great answers, and I realize it's a complex topic we could probably spend an entire 45-minute webinar talking about. But for the sake of today, I think we should move on to the next myth. It's somewhat related to this though, and so hopefully we'll kind of give an opportunity for us to continue some of the conversation around that. But this is also one that we hear from a lot of teams as well. Yeah, it's great we all get together and we do estimation, but ultimately we should just go with the most experienced team members estimate. At the end of the day, it's nice for us all to be part of this process and for us to sit around the table and to, or online, offer up our estimates. But, it's that most experienced person on the team whose estimate probably holds the most weight we should really consider. So, JJ, what do you think about this one?
What if they get hit by a bus? But
Same thing, yeah.
But the other thing is the most accurate estimates, and there's been a ton of research on this, are done by the people actually doing the work. So someone who's really experienced will say, "Oh, I know how to do that. That's boom, boom, boom. I can take care of that. It's an extra small story. I can get it done this afternoon, no problem." While someone who is new, less experienced, and then ends up they're doing the one who pulls the work, as George was saying earlier, it's going to be a lot bigger for them. And so if you accept the most experienced team members, you're going to get, because what's the point of estimates? You got to remember, when is it going to be done? That's the whole point. When is it going to be done? Capacity. I mean, there's some other reasons, but really the main reason is when is it going to be done? And if you have just the most experienced person, you're going to get a false answer. And so you're going to go to stakeholders and say, "Oh, well, our estimates are this, we'll be done by this time." And when that time comes by and you are not, you will be in trouble. They will not be happy about that. George?
I'm laughing out of experience more than anything. I worked on a team once where the most technically savvy person did more than their share of estimates, and that project was so behind. And it came down to the fact that they weren't the ones pulling the work, right? They weren't the ones doing it. And so as a result, the people that were didn't have the same clarity of thought, of path of execution that, architect did. The thing that you have to remember is that software is built by teams, right? It's not just individuals, right? We work together as teams. And when you take the most experienced team members' estimate and you apply it to the team, they're never going to live up to that. And that's going to kill your morale. It really is. You're going to burn the team out. You're also going to let your stakeholders down, right? So it's a lose-lose all around. It really is. Don't do it.
Those are both great answers. We have a couple questions, actually. I guess the next part of the webinar, in the 10 minutes or so that we have left here, I want to keep things on time because I know people have other meetings and other things to jump into. But we did have a couple questions that were actually submitted ahead of time by people who hopefully are in the audience today. And then I will encourage anyone who has questions. This is a great time to be using that Q&A functionality as well. If you do have a question, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end to be able to answer those on the fly. But I want to jump into our first question that was submitted ahead of time today, which is probably something I think a lot of teams are facing. We're not estimating work today, but we want to understand our velocity. Maybe that's a requirement of the organization, or the team just wants to improve and understand how much work they can take on over a given kind of time period. What is the best way to get started with estimation? JJ, we will maybe start with you on this one.
Sure. This is how I recommend people do it. There are many different ways. is I say, okay, get a bunch of stories on the table. They're very well understood. The acceptance criteria are understood. The definition of done is understood. And so everyone knows what's going on. So that's already happened. And then you say, okay, what's the easiest one to do? And then you say, okay, we're going to call that a 3. Why are we going to call that a 3? Just because we are. Like, why is a kilogram a kilogram? Because we say it is. You know, it's a made up number, right? That we just, but we want a reference point, because as we were saying earlier, people are really good. Then you take the next story and say, okay, is this one bigger? If that's a 3, or you can do it with t-shirt sizes if you want. If that's a medium, if that's a small, is this a medium or is it an extra small? And then you continuously compare things to relative sizing. And how you do it, and you're gonna be bad at it at first. But that's okay. You'll be good at it in a few weeks. If you're, I really like 1 week sprints, so I know George does as well. But you know, if you do that, you know, that many times, you do that in 3 cycles, 3-4 cycles, you get better and better at it, and it'll be quick. So basically, this is the same thing I say with everything. Just start. Like, what do you need to talk about? Google planning poker and try. You know, it's just, you know, just start trying, and you'll be bad at it at first, like anything else, and then you'll get better.
George, anything you'd add in this one?
I'll just put my full disclosure. I prefer 1 week sprints. My own team today, we work in 2 week sprints. There it is. I've said it out loud. JJ shaming, no. Putting on the product hat, we actually have planning poker in Zenhub. So you go in, you pick your the stories or issues, GitHub issues that you want to grab the team together, get estimates on. You pick them, you pick their names, and then the team asynchronously even can add their estimates. If they're aligned, then Zenhub will set the estimate automatically. If they're not aligned, then that's an opportunity for you and your team to come together and have the conversation to understand the whys. Why do you think it's an extra large? Why do you think it's an extra small? Give them 30 seconds and then go from there. The thing that I love about it is that, like, one of our teams, we've got a team called Team Watney, and when we were building this, we drink our own champagne, right? We eat our own cooking. And they found that it radically reduced the number of issues that they were bringing to refinement, because it turned out they had been debating things they actually agreed upon. And so it, like, seriously reduced the number of things they were bringing together. It brought the focus to the things that they were out of alignment on. So yeah, give it a try. Like, just try it. It'll be uncomfortable at first. You'll be worried that you'll be wrong, but that's okay. It's okay, right? Give it a try. You'll get better. Anyway.
So, bonus question for you both. Maybe this can be kind of a lightning round on this question, but what are those common pitfalls, you know, maybe in just a short sentence that teams should watch out for? Yeah, I think the spirit of this question is, we're not estimating, but we want to get started. What are those pitfalls a team should pay attention to, or be on the lookout if they are going to get started with estimation?
Anchoring is probably the biggest one that happens when sort of the loudest personality in the room. So like in planning poker, it's like it's poker. Everyone does it quietly. It actually comes from that Delphi technique that I was talking about. That's actually what inspired planning poker, is everyone makes their estimates by themselves and then shares them, rather than, so otherwise you're going to get the most experienced person in the room. Well, I think that's a this, and everyone's going to say, yes, sir, that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one.
I'll also say that curbing debate is a thing that can get out of hand, especially when you do bring the things together where you find you're out of alignment. JJ, one of my favorite things that you taught me was, like, time box these things, right? Say, all right, you think it's an extra large, you think it's an extra, okay, 30 seconds, state your case, tell us why. Okay, good, you're done. And that's why it's important to have somebody in the driver's seat, right? Scrum master, leader, team leader.
And you don't need to converge. So planning poker really says, hey, if it's like, if someone has a 3, someone has a 5, someone has an 8, close enough, add it up and average. You don't need to converge on a Fibonacci number together for exactly that reason, because you're all wrong. So just add it up and average.
Yeah.
And that's really, really important is, because as you can just go for hours. And then if you have people who are really stuck, these people's like, no, I will not budge from my low number and they will not budge from their high number. After like 3 times, just throw their numbers out and average the rest.
There you go.
Makes sense.
And it'll all even itself out because some things will be over, some things will be under. And when you look at velocity, which you calculate over a number of sprints, it'll all even itself out. Don't sweat the small stuff.
Great. Well, in the interest of time here, we have one question left and a couple minutes to answer it. So hopefully we can get to this one. It's an important one though, and I think a question that a lot of teams have, which is our velocity always seems to be lower than other development teams at our company. How can we improve our velocity? So there's kind of 2 components to that. I guess comparing yourself to other teams, which I think is human nature. We all want to benchmark ourselves. Is that a good thing? And the second part of that question, how can we improve our velocity?
It's a horrible thing because for an individual team, velocity is really a planning metric. It's not a performance metric. And so also different teams are going to have different sizing. Okay, this team maybe has less experience doing Kubernetes or whatever, and they're doing it. So they're going to estimate stuff as a lot larger than this team over here. Or it's scruminc. I have one team and they are dead set that nothing can be bigger than an 8, right? That's just like, that's their largest thing. I have another team that, they go 21 sometimes, because that's just how they've decided to do their estimation. Now, the team that, estimates small actually produces more value. So from an external perspective, velocity is immaterial. And actually from a customer perspective, who cares? Is it done? And so you measure what you want, which is measuring value. So you can't compare raw velocity. What you can compare is the derivatives of velocity. You can compare acceleration. How fast is this team getting faster? Right? That you can compare across teams. Yeah. You can compare sort of a say-do ratio, like how accurate they say they're going to bring this much into the sprint. How much do they actually complete? So how good is their velocity and their planning using that velocity to know how much they can complete in the sprint? Those kind of things you can compare across teams, but raw velocity, you just can't.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
George, I'll give you the last word on this one before we wrap up here.
I was just going to say, we're people, not robots, right? So you shouldn't expect the same exact thing out of different people. And again, measuring the things that should be measured, acceleration, what you planned versus achieved and the percentage, that, cool. Use a retro, figure out how to improve. I mean, figure out what's standing in your way, right? And if you're always doing things and having to spike on things, then maybe there's some up leveling that needs to happen. Maybe there's some unexplored part of your code base that you need to get education on. Maybe you're misaligned with the mission that you're given. Like, run a retro, figure out how to improve, and go from there.
Right. Well, gentlemen, we're out of time today. I'm sure we could continue talking about this for the next hour to 2 hours today. There's so much to unpack here when it comes to estimation, but I wanted to thank you guys again, both so much for taking the time out of your day to spend some time with us and talk about estimation, dispel some of these myths, and hopefully for those of you listening, help make it a little bit more comfortable to get started with estimation. We will share the recording from this session afterwards. So if you had team members that had signed up but didn't get the chance to join, you can of course share it with them or encourage them to go sign up for the on-demand webinar. But again, thank you both so much for joining. Thank you to everyone who took 45 minutes out of your day to join us today. We really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, Aaron. See you later, George.
Thanks, JJ. Thanks, Aaron.
All right. Bye.